The executive dining room of Grant Anderson Financial Group glittered with Chicago's skyline as CEO Olivia Grant reached for her wine glass. 30 minutes until the billion-dollar merger would be signed, the deal that would cement her legacy. 3 floors below, night janitor Daniel Reed pushed his mop cart down marble corridors, the squeak of wheels echoing through empty halls. At 42, his weathered hands moved with the steady rhythm of a man who'd found peace in work that others overlooked. The sharp gasp from the dining room cut through the building's quiet hum. Daniel's head snapped up, every parental instinct suddenly alert as he saw Olivia stumbling from her chair, one hand clutching her throat. Her face was flushing bright red, something he'd seen before, something that made his stomach drop with recognition. "Call 911!" someone shouted from inside, but the executive stood frozen while Olivia collapsed to her knees, fighting for breath. Security guards clutched their radios, paralyzed by protocols and liability concerns. Daniel's maintenance keys jangled as he sprinted toward his locker. Inside his jacket pocket, always there since Chloe started middle school, was her spare emergency injector, the backup that had cost him overtime shifts to afford, the medicine he carried everywhere because 10-year-old allergic kids couldn't always carry their own. Through the glass doors, Olivia's lips were turning blue. Daniel stared at the medical device in his hands, then at the powerful woman 30 feet away who was about to die while everyone watched. Using it meant breaking every company rule and risking everything. Not using it meant living with consequences he'd sworn to never face again. The injector felt cold against his palm as he made his choice. She had maybe 2 minutes left. If stories about invisible heroes resonate with you, hit subscribe, because every night shift worker deserves recognition. Now, let's see what Daniel does next. 6 hours earlier, Daniel had been crouched beside his daughter's bed, watching Chloe practice using her EpiPen trainer for the 100th time. The morning sun filtered through their apartment's thin curtains as she pressed the orange tip against her thigh with the serious concentration of a child who understood that mistakes could kill. "Firm pressure, count to 3, massage the injection site," she recited, her small voice steady despite the weight of responsibility no 10-year-old should carry. "Perfect," Daniel said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Just like that. But as Chloe packed her real EpiPen into her school bag, Daniel's eyes caught the envelope on their kitchen counter, the one with the red final notice stamp that had arrived yesterday. $847 for her last visit to the allergy specialist. Money he didn't have, for tests that confirmed what they already knew. His daughter was allergic to enough foods to fill a grocery list. "Daddy?" Chloe's voice was smaller now, uncertain. "The other kids at school are going on a field trip to the Science Museum next month." Daniel's hand stilled as he helped her with her medical alert bracelet. Field trips meant permission slips, lunch money, transportation fees, a cascade of expenses that might as well have been asking for the moon. "How much does it cost, sweetheart?" $35. "But it's okay if we can't." She said it with the practiced resignation of a child who'd learned not to ask for things, and something cracked inside Daniel's chest. The school bus honked outside their window, its yellow bulk idling in the morning exhaust haze. Chloe grabbed her backpack, heavy with textbooks they'd bought used, and an emergency kit that cost more than most people's car payments. "Have a good day, Chloe Bug," Daniel called as she headed for the door. "Bye, Dad. Don't forget to eat lunch today." The apartment felt hollow after she left, filled only with the hum of their ancient refrigerator and the distant rumble of Chicago traffic. Daniel opened the medical bill again, the numbers swimming before his tired eyes. $847, due in 14 days, with late fees that would spiral into collections calls and credit damage, and all the ways poverty punished people for needing health care. His phone buzzed, a text from the building supervisor. "Extra cleaning needed on executive floor tonight. Kitchen deep clean before big dinner tomorrow. Double shift available." Double shift meant 16 hours instead of 8. It meant falling asleep on the bus ride home, missing Chloe's bedtime story, surviving on vending machine coffee, and the kind of exhaustion that settled into your bones. But it also meant an extra $120. Daniel stared at the medical bill, then typed back, "I'll take it." The Grant Anderson building rose 43 floors into Chicago's steel sky, its glass facade reflecting clouds that Daniel never had time to watch. He'd been cleaning these halls for 2 years now, ever since the hospital laid off half their lab technicians during restructuring. a corporate word that meant good people got thrown away when budgets tightened. His supervisor, Mike Torres, met him at the service entrance with a clipboard thick with work orders and the weary expression of a man who'd spent 20 years managing other people's messes. "Kitchen's a disaster after the prep team left," Mike said, handing over the executive floor key card. "Some big merger dinner tomorrow night. They want everything spotless." Daniel nodded, loading his cart with industrial cleaners and the kind of attention to detail that came from understanding what spotless meant to people who could fire you with a phone call. The executive kitchen sprawled across the 38th floor like something from a high-end restaurant, all stainless steel surfaces and commercial-grade equipment that gleamed under fluorescent lights. But as Daniel began his inspection, his trained eye caught details that made him pause. The red cutting board, designated for raw meat, sat stacked beneath boards meant for vegetables, cross-contamination waiting to happen. The hand-washing station soap dispenser hung empty, and the sanitizer log sheet showed no entries for the past 6 days. Daniel pulled out his small notebook, the same one he'd carried since starting this job, and began documenting timestamps, violations, the kind of careful record-keeping that came from years in clinical labs where precision meant the difference between accurate results and patient harm. 12:47 a.m., red cutting board improperly stored 12:52 a.m., hand sanitizer stations empty 1:03 a.m., allergen protocol checklist blank for 6 consecutive days. As he cleaned, scrubbing surfaces with the methodical care of someone who understood bacteria and contamination at a molecular level, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Daniel glanced up to see Marcus Webb, one of the CEO's personal assistants, walking through the kitchen with unusual interest. "Working late tonight," Marcus observed, his expensive suit looking out of place in the industrial space. "Yes, sir. Getting ready for tomorrow's dinner." Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the kitchen with an intensity that struck Daniel as odd. In 2 years of night shifts, he'd never seen any of the executives pay attention to food preparation areas. "Tell me," Marcus said casually, "do you know anything about the CEO's dietary restrictions?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel had seen enough corporate politics to know when someone was fishing for information they shouldn't have. "I just clean, sir. I don't handle food service." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Just curious." After Marcus left, Daniel continued his work with growing unease. Something felt wrong about that conversation, about the way Marcus had studied the kitchen layouts, about questions that had nothing to do with cleanliness. He opened his notebook again and added another entry, 2:15 a.m., PA Marcus Webb asking about CEO dietary info, unusual outside. Chicago slept while Daniel worked through the night, unaware that his careful observations were documenting something far more dangerous than health code violations. The next morning brought another envelope under Daniel's apartment door, this one from the property management company with "Rent Reminder" printed in bold letters across the front. He stared at the paper while coffee dripped through their ancient machine, the bitter aroma mixing with the growing weight in his chest. $1,500 due in 48 hours. The double shift would cover most of it, but not the late fees from last month when Chloe's emergency room visit had eaten their rent money. "Dad," Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school, but moving with the careful deliberation of someone managing a chronic condition. "Did you remember to refill the EpiPen prescription?" Daniel's stomach tightened. The pharmacy had called yesterday. Insurance would only cover 1 set per month, and they'd already used their allotment when Chloe's previous injector expired early. The replacement would cost $230 out of pocket. "Working on it, sweetheart," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. Chloe nodded, but her 10-year-old eyes held the kind of worry that belonged on an adult's face. She'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands moved differently when money was tight. "The Science Museum trip permission slip is due Friday," she said quietly. "But if we can't afford it, don't worry about that right now." Daniel knelt down to check her medical alert bracelet, the metal warm from her skin. "Let's just focus on today, okay?" After Chloe left for school, Daniel opened his laptop and began the familiar ritual of job searching. Clinical lab positions, medical technician roles, anything that would use his actual training instead of just his willingness to work nights. The responses came back like form letters. Overqualified for entry-level positions. Current certification required for senior roles. Thank you for your interest. 6 years of experience in immunology labs specializing in allergen testing and anaphylaxis protocols. Knowledge that could save lives, reduced to a resume that hiring managers glanced at for 30 seconds before moving to the next candidate. His phone buzzed with a text from Mike Torres. Need you in early tonight. Kitchen inspection found violations. Executive team wants everything documented and fixed before dinner. Daniel's blood ran cold. The violations he'd logged in his notebook. Someone else had finally noticed them. But instead of being thanked for his detailed observations, he was being called in to fix problems that should have been prevented. At 4 p.m., Daniel arrived at the Grant Anderson building to find the executive kitchen in chaos. Health inspectors moved through the space with clipboards and cameras while the executive chef, a man whose salary probably exceeded Daniel's annual income, gestured angrily at stainless steel surfaces. "This is ridiculous," the chef was saying to Mike Torres. "We've never had problems before." Suddenly, some janitor thinks he's a health expert? Mike spotted Daniel and waved him over. "Reed, show me what you found last night." Daniel pulled out his notebook, the pages filled with precise handwriting and timestamps. Cross-contamination risks on the cutting boards, empty sanitizer stations, allergen protocol logs haven't been filled out in 6 days. The health inspector, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, glanced up from her checklist. "You documented all this?" "Yes, ma'am. I worked in clinical labs before this job. Food safety protocols are similar to laboratory sterility procedures." The chef's face darkened. "I don't need some night cleaner telling me how to run my kitchen." "Mr. Reed's documentation is exactly what we needed," the inspector said firmly. "These violations could have caused serious illness or death, especially for anyone with severe allergies." As the inspection continued, Daniel noticed Marcus Webb hovering near the kitchen entrance, watching the proceedings with barely concealed frustration. When their eyes met, Marcus's expression shifted to something that made Daniel's instincts prickle with warning. After the inspectors left, Mike pulled Daniel aside. "Good work spotting those problems," he said, "but the executive team isn't happy about the attention this brought. Chef Martinelli specifically requested that you be reassigned to other floors." "Reassigned? But the violations were real. Someone could get seriously hurt if—" "I know, Reed, but you know how it works around here. The people upstairs don't like being told they're wrong, especially by—" Mike gestured helplessly. "By a janitor," Daniel finished. "Just keep your head down, okay? I'll try to work something out, but right now they want you staying away from the executive level." Daniel felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, of having his expertise reduced to his job title. But underneath the frustration was something deeper, the growing certainty that Marcus Webb's interest in the kitchen violations wasn't about food safety. That evening, as he cleaned the lower floors instead of his usual route, Daniel couldn't shake the image of empty allergen logs and Marcus's calculating smile. His notebook sat heavy in his pocket, filled with observations that suddenly felt more important than routine maintenance records. Somewhere 38 floors above, preparations for tomorrow's merger dinner continued without the one person who'd noticed that something was terribly wrong. Daniel sat at their kitchen table after midnight, surrounded by bills spread across the scratched surface like a losing hand of cards. The calculator's red digital display showed numbers that never added up right, no matter how many times he tried different combinations. Rent, $1,500. Medical bills, $847. Chloe's backup EpiPens, $230. Groceries, utilities, her allergy medications. The math was simple and brutal. He was $300 short, even with the double shift. In the corner, their ancient refrigerator hummed and wheezed, adding its own commentary to his calculations. The light above their table flickered occasionally, another repair they couldn't afford. "Dad?" Chloe's voice came soft from the hallway. "I can't sleep." Daniel quickly swept the bills into a pile, but not before Chloe caught sight of the red "Final Notice" stamps. Her small face crumpled with the kind of understanding that children shouldn't possess. "Is it because of me? Because of my medicines?" "No, sweetheart." Daniel pulled her onto his lap, her warm weight settling against his chest. "None of this is your fault. We're just going through a tough patch. Maybe I don't need the backup EpiPen at home. The school nurse has one and—" "Chloe, no." The sharpness in his voice made her flinch, and he immediately softened his tone. "You carry your medicine everywhere. That's not negotiable. But even as he said it, Daniel's eyes drifted to the pharmacy receipt on the table. $230 for a device that might save her life. Money they didn't have for medicine she hopefully wouldn't need. The science museum trip? Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. What about it? I told Mrs. Patterson I probably can't go. She said maybe there's a scholarship fund, but I said we're fine. Pride and shame warred in her young voice. We are fine, right, Dad? Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of every choice that had led them here. His wife's medical bills from her final hospital stay, the job loss when the hospital downsized, the slow slide from middle-class stability to paycheck survival. We're going to figure it out, he said, though he had no idea how. The next morning brought a call from the pharmacy. Chloe's EpiPen prescription was ready for pickup. $230, cash only, since their insurance had reached its monthly limit. Can we break it into payments? Daniel asked, already knowing the answer. I'm sorry, sir. It's a specialty medication. Full payment required at pickup. Daniel stared at his bank balance on his phone screen. $43.18. The double shift payment wouldn't hit his account until Friday, 3 days after Chloe's current EpiPen expired. At Chloe's school pickup, he found himself studying the other parents. Soccer moms in SUVs that cost more than he made in 2 years. Fathers in business suits checking phones that probably cost more than their rent. Normal families with normal problems, not the constant calculation of survival. Mr. Reed, Mrs. Patterson, Chloe's teacher, approached with a gentle smile. Could I speak with you for a moment? They walked a few steps away from the pickup line, and Daniel felt the familiar anxiety of parent-teacher conferences and concerns about his daughter's future. Chloe is an exceptional student, Mrs. Patterson said, especially in science. Her understanding of biological systems is remarkable for her age. She's always been curious about how things work. I imagine having to understand her medical condition has contributed to that interest. Mrs. Patterson's eyes were kind but perceptive. About the museum trip, I know she declined to participate, but the district has funds available for families who need assistance. There's no shame in accepting help. Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. Even Chloe's teacher could see their financial struggles, could read the careful way his daughter had learned to want nothing. We're managing fine, he said automatically, of course. But the offer stands. Chloe has so much potential and experiences like these. I said we're fine. Mrs. Patterson nodded, but her expression held the same gentle persistence that good teachers learned. She mentioned wanting to study medicine someday, to help other kids with allergies. After they got home, Daniel sat in his car outside their apartment building, engine off to save gas, and called the cemetery where his wife was buried. I need to visit Sarah's grave tomorrow evening, he told the administrative office. What are your evening hours? We close at sunset, sir, about 7:30 this time of year. He'd been planning to visit on her birthday next month, when he could afford flowers. But the weight of their situation, of Chloe's quiet sacrifice and his own inability to provide, felt too heavy to carry alone. That night, as Chloe worked on homework at the kitchen table, Daniel opened his laptop and began typing a carefully worded email to Mike Torres. Mike, requesting permission to work executive level tomorrow night despite reassignment. I know there were complaints, but I have specific expertise in medical safety protocols that could be valuable during the merger dinner. Willing to work without overtime pay. He stared at the message for 10 minutes before hitting send. It was a desperate move, probably career suicide, but something about Marcus Webb's behavior and those empty allergen logs felt wrong in a way that made his chest tight with foreboding. In the morning, he'd find out if his expertise was worth more than his job security. Mike Torres called at noon the next day, his voice carrying the weariness of a supervisor caught between competing pressures. Executive team approved your request, he said, but Reed, this is your last chance. One complaint, one problem, and you're done here. Understood? Understood. And they want detailed documentation of everything you do tonight. Every procedure, every observation. Corporate wants a paper trail in case there are more health department questions. Daniel felt a grim satisfaction at the request. Documentation was exactly what he'd been doing for 2 years, building a careful record that nobody had bothered to read until inspectors forced their attention. I can handle that. Kitchen staff will be working until 6. Dinner service starts at 7:30. You'll have 90 minutes to complete your inspection and setup before the VIPs arrive. After hanging up, Daniel pulled out his notebook and reviewed the entries from the past week. The patterns were there if you knew how to look. Empty sanitizer stations, unsigned allergen logs, Marcus Webb's unusual questions about dietary restrictions, pieces of a puzzle that made his stomach clench with recognition. He'd seen this before, in the restaurant where Sarah died. The same casual disregard for protocols, the same assumption that it won't happen here, the same deadly confidence that killed his wife while he stood helpless in a hospital waiting room. At 5:30 p.m., Daniel arrived at the Grant Anderson building carrying more than his usual cleaning supplies. Tucked into his maintenance kit was a digital camera, his own, purchased years ago to document Chloe's school events, and a fresh notebook with pages organized by safety protocol categories. The executive kitchen buzzed with pre-dinner energy. Chef Martinelli directed his team through appetizer preparation, while servers polished glasses and arranged place settings in the adjacent dining room. Daniel stayed invisible, moving through the space with the practiced anonymity of someone whose job was to notice without being noticed, but his eyes missed nothing. The red cutting board that should have been sanitized between uses sat stacked beneath vegetable boards, shellfish residue still visible along the edges. The hand-washing station remained empty of soap, despite yesterday's inspector recommendations. Most telling of all, the allergen protocol checklist hung blank on the wall. Not a single signature in 9 consecutive days. Daniel photographed each violation with clinical precision, adding timestamps and detailed descriptions to his notebook. 5:47 p.m., red cutting board hash 3 shows pink residue, likely shellfish protein. Stacked beneath green boards hash 1 and hash 2. Cross-contamination risk, high 5:52 p.m., hand sanitizer station hash. 2 empty, pump mechanism not functional. Staff observed using same gloves for multiple food prep tasks. 6:03 p.m., allergen protocol checklist completely unsigned since October 15th. No documentation of staff training or dietary restriction protocols. As he worked, Daniel noticed the kitchen team's casual approach to safety procedures. Gloves worn for hours without changing. Cutting surfaces used interchangeably. The kind of shortcuts that saved time and money until someone ended up in an ambulance. "Still here, Reed?" Marcus Webb's voice made Daniel look up from his documentation. "Yes, sir. Completing the safety inspection you requested." Marcus stepped closer, his expensive cologne mixing with the kitchen's industrial smells. "Find anything interesting?" "Standard protocol violations. Nothing that can't be corrected with proper training." But Marcus's eyes had found Daniel's notebook, and something shifted in his expression. "You're quite thorough for a janitor. I like to do the job right. Where did you learn to write reports like that?" Marcus gestured toward the open notebook, where Daniel's precise medical terminology was clearly visible. For a moment, Daniel considered deflecting, but something about Marcus's probing questions and calculated interest felt like a test he was tired of failing. "I worked in clinical laboratories for 6 years before this job. Immunology and allergen testing mostly. Same protocols apply to food safety." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting. And you've been documenting kitchen safety for how long?" "Since I started working here. 2 years of observations." 2 years. Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a lot of observations." After Marcus left, Daniel continued his work with growing unease. The conversation felt less like casual interest and more like intelligence gathering. But gathering intelligence about what? At 6:15, as the kitchen staff finished their prep work, Daniel noticed something that made his blood run cold. A server was preparing the VIP table settings, and among the carefully arranged plates was a small card noting dietary restrictions for each guest. CEO Olivia Grant's card was blank. Daniel approached the server, a young woman who looked barely out of culinary school. "Excuse me, the dietary restriction card for Miss Grant?" "Oh, Mr. Webb handled that personally," she said brightly. "Said the CEO's preferences were confidential and he'd communicate them directly to the kitchen." "Did he communicate anything specific?" "Just that she's very particular about presentation, wants the full tasting menu, no modifications." Daniel felt ice form in his stomach. In 6 years of allergen testing, he'd learned to recognize the patterns that led to anaphylactic shock. Empty protocols, missing documentation, and, most dangerous of all, someone actively preventing safety communication. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote, 6:17 p.m., dietary restriction information for CEO deliberately obscured by PA Webb. Server unaware of potential allergen risks. Recommend immediate verification of guest safety protocols. As the kitchen finished prep work and the first VIP guests began arriving, Daniel realized his 2 years of careful observations had documented something far more sinister than negligence. The executive dining room filled with the soft murmur of billion-dollar conversations as Chicago's most powerful financiers took their seats for the merger dinner. Daniel positioned himself in the service corridor, close enough to observe, but invisible to the guests who shaped economic empires while he cleaned up after them. Through the glass partition, he watched Olivia Grant command the head table with effortless authority. At 37, she moved through the room like someone accustomed to having markets respond to her decisions. Her platinum watch caught the ambient light as she gestured toward merger documents that would reshape 2 financial dynasties. But Daniel's attention wasn't on corporate theater. His eyes tracked the servers moving between kitchen and dining room, noting every plate that passed through spaces where allergen protocols had been ignored for over a week. At 7:45, the first course arrived, shellfish bisque in delicate porcelain bowls garnished with microgreens and what Daniel's trained eye recognized as lobster oil, the same shellfish proteins that had contaminated every cutting surface in the kitchen. Olivia lifted her spoon and tasted the soup while discussing market volatility with the merger partner seated to her right. Normal dinner conversation, the kind of casual consumption that defined her world. Daniel checked his watch. If the cross-contamination was significant, symptoms would begin within 5 to 8 minutes. He found himself holding his breath, hoping his fears were unfounded. 7:51. Olivia reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. 7:52. She touched her throat, a gesture so subtle that her dinner companions didn't notice. 7:53. The first flush appeared on her neck, spreading upward like spilled wine on pale fabric. Daniel's medical training kicked in with crystalline clarity. Stage 1 anaphylaxis, progressing exactly as he'd witnessed with Chloe during her first severe reaction. The same progression that had killed his wife while paramedics struggled through traffic. "Excuse me for a moment," Olivia said, her voice slightly strained as she stood from the table. She moved toward the private restroom adjacent to the dining room, one hand gripping her chair for balance. Daniel was already moving, his maintenance key card beeping against the elevator sensors as he descended to his locker. Chloe's backup EpiPen sat in its protective case, nestled beside her school photo, like a talisman against the kind of helplessness that had destroyed their family once before. By the time he returned to the executive floor, Olivia's breathing had become labored. Through the restroom's frosted glass, Daniel could see her silhouette swaying as she gripped the marble countertop. "Ma'am?" Daniel knocked softly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," came the response, but her voice was hoarse, constricted. "Ma'am, I have medical training. Can you open the door?" Silence, then the sound of the lock turning. Olivia emerged with her face flushed crimson, lips beginning to show the blue tint that preceded cardiovascular collapse. "I think I'm having an allergic reaction," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. Stage 2 anaphylaxis. Where's your EpiPen?" "My office, 3 floors up." Each word came with visible effort. Daniel looked at his watch. 90 seconds, maybe less, before her airway closed completely. 3 floors might as well have been 3 miles. "Ma'am, I have an epinephrine injector. I need your permission to administer it." Olivia's eyes widened with the clarity that comes just before shock. "You're the janitor." "I'm also a former clinical lab technician who specializes in allergen protocols. And right now, I'm the person who can save your life." The sound of approaching voices echoed from the dining room, her dinner guests beginning to notice her absence, security guards radioing about a potential medical situation. "Do it," Olivia whispered. Daniel removed the EpiPen from its case, his movements precise despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "This is going into your outer thigh. You'll feel a sharp pain, then your heart rate will increase rapidly. That's normal." He pressed the orange tip against her leg through her dress and triggered the injection. The spring-loaded needle delivered its dose of synthetic adrenaline while Daniel counted under his breath. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The effect was immediate. Olivia's breathing eased as her bronchial passages reopened, the blue tint fading from her lips as circulation returned. Her hand found Daniel's arm, gripping with the desperate strength of someone who had just stepped back from the edge. "Better?" Daniel asked. "Better. But I feel like my heart is going to explode." "That's the epinephrine. Normal side effect." We need to get you to a hospital for secondary monitoring and steroid treatment." By now, the dining room had erupted in controlled panic. Executive assistants spoke urgently into phones, while security guards cleared pathways and someone shouted orders about liability protocols. Who administered emergency medicine to Miss Grant? The head of security appeared in the corridor, his radio crackling with dispatcher chatter. "I did," Daniel said simply. "Are you a doctor?" "Former clinical lab technician, 6 years of experience with anaphylaxis protocols." The security chief stared at Daniel's maintenance uniform, then at Olivia, who was breathing normally but still flushed from the epinephrine rush. "Ma'am, we need to document this incident. There are liability concerns about unauthorized medical treatment." "He saved my life," Olivia interrupted, her voice stronger now, but carrying an edge that could cut through corporate hierarchy. "Whatever documentation you need, make it reflect that a member of my staff prevented my death while everyone else was discussing protocols." As EMTs arrived and began their assessment, Daniel found himself surrounded by executives and lawyers, all asking questions about his medical training and the source of the EpiPen he'd administered. But through the controlled chaos, one face stood out. Marcus Webb, watching from the dining room entrance with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. The merger dinner was over, but Daniel's real test was just beginning. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital buzzed with the controlled urgency that Daniel remembered from Sarah's final hours. But this time, he wasn't the helpless family member waiting for news. He was the reason Olivia Grant was sitting upright on a gurney instead of lying on a morgue table. "Mr. Reed," a hospital lawyer appeared beside him in the waiting area, clipboard in hand and questions in her eyes. "I'm Janet Morrison, legal counsel. We need to discuss the medication you administered. Epinephrine auto-injector, standard treatment for anaphylactic shock. But not your medication to administer. The EpiPen was prescribed for..." She consulted her notes. "Chloe Reed, age 10. Your daughter?" Daniel's stomach tightened. "Yes, Mr. Reed, while your actions may have saved Miss Grant's life, using prescription medication belonging to another person is technically illegal." "I know." Daniel's voice was flat. "Would you prefer I had followed the law and watched her die?" The lawyer's expression softened slightly. "No one is questioning your intentions, but there are protocols, liability concerns. The hospital needs to understand your medical background." For the next hour, Daniel found himself explaining his training to a parade of administrators, lawyers, and investigators, clinical, laboratory experience, allergen testing certification, 6 years of working with anaphylaxis protocols before the hospital downsized him into invisibility. "Why didn't you mention this expertise to your current employer?" asked a corporate attorney who'd arrived from Grant Anderson's legal team. "I did, repeatedly. I documented safety violations in the executive kitchen for 2 years. My reports were dismissed because I'm just a janitor." "You have documentation?" Daniel pulled out his notebook, its pages filled with precise observations and timestamps. The lawyer's eyes widened as she read his clinical descriptions of cross-contamination risks and protocol failures. "This is incredibly detailed, professional-level documentation. I know how to do my job, both jobs." While lawyers debated liability and hospitals processed paperwork, Daniel's phone rang with a call that made his blood run cold. "Mr. Reed, this is Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you about tonight's incident." "FBI? Miss Grant's allergic reaction appears to have been deliberately triggered. Your observations may be crucial to our investigation." The words hit Daniel like ice water. Deliberately triggered. Marcus Webb's questions about dietary restrictions, the missing allergen protocols, the blank dietary card that should have warned the kitchen about Olivia's allergies. "Mr. Reed, are you there?" "Yes, what do you need to know?" "We're sending agents to interview you. Don't discuss this with anyone else until we arrive." Daniel hung up and stared at his notebook with new understanding. 2 years of careful observations weren't just safety documentation. They were evidence of a conspiracy that had nearly succeeded. At midnight, FBI agents arrived at the hospital with questions that made Daniel's head spin. The merger Olivia was negotiating wasn't just business. It was a $14 billion acquisition that would eliminate Grant Anderson's biggest competitor. If Olivia died before signing, the deal would collapse, and the rival company would survive. "Marcus Webb has been in contact with executives at Richardson Financial," Agent Chen explained. Phone records show extensive communication over the past month. If Miss Grant had died tonight, Webb stood to receive a substantial payment for preventing the merger. Corporate assassination, Daniel said quietly. Attempted, thanks to your intervention and documentation. Agent Chen opened Daniel's notebook, pointing to specific entries. This timeline shows deliberate sabotage of safety protocols. The empty sanitizer stations, missing allergen logs. Webb was systematically creating conditions for cross-contamination. And when that wasn't enough, he made sure the kitchen staff didn't know about Miss Grant's shellfish allergy. Exactly. Your notebook provides the evidence chain we need to prove premeditation. As dawn broke over Chicago, Daniel sat in a hospital chair and tried to process the magnitude of what had happened. He'd saved a woman's life, exposed a corporate conspiracy, and used his daughter's medicine to prevent a murder. But the victory felt hollow when his phone rang with a call from Child Protective Services. Mr. Reed, we received a report about medication irregularities involving your daughter, Chloe. We need to schedule a home visit to discuss her medical care. Daniel's hands shook as he ended the call. Someone, probably the hospital lawyers or insurance investigators, had flagged Chloe's missing EpiPen as potential child endangerment. He'd saved a billionaire's life and might lose his daughter in the process. Outside the hospital windows, Chicago awakened to news of a failed corporate assassination, while Daniel wondered if doing the right thing had cost him everything that mattered. Daniel stood outside their apartment building at 7 a.m., keys heavy in his hand, as exhaustion weighed down every muscle. 24 hours ago, he'd been a night janitor worried about medical bills. Now he was a key witness in a federal investigation, facing Child Protective Services questions about his daughter's medication. The elevator climbed to their floor with mechanical indifference, while Daniel's mind raced through possible explanations for Chloe. How do you tell a 10-year-old that her backup medicine saved a stranger's life but might cost her family everything? Dad, Chloe's voice came from the kitchen as he opened the apartment door. She sat at their small table, already dressed for school, concern etched across her young face. You were gone all night. I called Mrs. Patterson when you didn't come home. Daniel sat beside her, the familiar weight of parental responsibility settling over his shoulders. I had to help someone who was very sick, someone who needed medicine like yours. My EpiPen? Yes, sweetheart. I had to use your backup injector to save a woman's life. Chloe's eyes widened with understanding that went beyond her years. Was she allergic like me? She was. And if I hadn't helped her, she would have died. For a long moment, Chloe said nothing. Then she reached across the table and took his hand with the same gentle certainty she'd inherited from her mother. I'm glad you saved her, Daddy. That's what the medicine is for. The simple acceptance in her voice nearly broke Daniel's composure. His 10-year-old daughter understood something that hospital lawyers and corporate executives couldn't grasp, that some decisions transcended rules and protocols. There might be some trouble about it, Daniel said carefully. People who don't understand why I had to make that choice. But you did the right thing. I hope so. A knock at their door interrupted the conversation. Daniel's stomach tightened, expecting CPS investigators or federal agents. Instead, he found Olivia Grant standing in their hallway, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater that made her look younger and more human than the corporate titan from the merger dinner. Miss Grant, how did you... I asked for your address from HR. I hope that's all right. Her eyes moved past him to Chloe, who had appeared in the doorway with curious 10-year-old boldness. You must be Chloe. Hi, are you the lady my dad saved? Olivia's composure wavered slightly. Yes, I am, and I came here to thank you both. Me? Your medicine saved my life. Your father told me it belonged to you. Daniel watched his daughter process this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance that came from living with life-threatening allergies. To Chloe, EpiPens weren't abstract medical devices. They were tools that meant the difference between ordinary days and emergency rooms. Did it hurt when he gave you the shot? Chloe asked. For a second, but not as much as not being able to breathe. Olivia turned to Daniel, her expression carrying weight that went beyond gratitude. I spent the night thinking about how to thank you properly, and I realized that words aren't enough for what you did. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a check that made Daniel's vision blur, enough to cover 6 months of rent, Chloe's medical expenses, and the backup EpiPens they'd need to replace. This isn't charity, Olivia said quickly, reading his expression. It's recognition. For 2 years, you've been doing a job that required expertise no one acknowledged. I want to offer you a position that matches your actual qualifications. Ma'am, Director of Safety and Compliance for Grant Anderson Financial Group. Salary commensurate with your clinical background and the value you bring to protecting our people. Daniel stared at the job offer, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. Director, a title that matched his training, his observations, his ability to see patterns that others missed. The FBI investigation will take months to resolve, Olivia continued. Marcus Webb and his co-conspirators will face federal charges for conspiracy and attempted murder. Your documentation was instrumental in building the case. What about Child Protective Services? They're investigating? No, they're not. Olivia's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems with phone calls and influence. I spoke with the hospital legal team this morning. Your quick thinking and proper medical training saved a life using appropriate protocols. There's no child endangerment issue. How did you? I'm very good at making problems disappear when they threaten good people. Chloe looked between the adults, processing conversations about futures and opportunities that had seemed impossible yesterday morning. Does this mean I can go on the field trip? She asked. Daniel laughed, the first genuine laughter he'd felt in months. Yes, sweetheart, you can go on the field trip. And you don't have to work nights anymore? No more night shifts. Chloe nodded with the solemn satisfaction of someone whose world had just shifted from precarious to stable. Good. Mrs. Patterson says I should study medicine when I grow up, to help kids like me. That sounds like a wonderful plan, Olivia said. And when you're ready for college, I hope you'll let me know. Grant Anderson has a scholarship program for students pursuing medical careers. As Olivia prepared to leave, she paused at their door and turned back to Daniel. I've spent my entire career believing that success meant making the hard choices, putting business first, keeping emotions separate from decisions. Last night, you showed me what real strength looks like. Thank you for that. After she left, Daniel sat with Chloe at their kitchen table, the job offer and check between them like evidence of a life they'd never dared to imagine. Dad? Yes? Are you going to take the new job? Daniel looked around their small apartment, at the medical bills no longer threatening their stability, at his daughter who deserved every opportunity he could provide. I think I am. For the first time in years, tomorrow felt like a promise instead of a threat. 6 months later, Daniel Reed stood before the Grant Anderson Financial Group Board of Directors, presenting quarterly safety metrics that had become a model for corporate America. The mahogany conference table reflected Chicago's autumn skyline as he clicked through slides showing a 63% reduction in workplace incidents and the implementation of what the media had dubbed the Reed Safety Initiative. Our comprehensive allergen protocols have been adopted by 12 Fortune 500 companies, Daniel explained, his voice carrying the confidence of someone whose expertise was finally valued. We've prevented 14 potential anaphylactic incidents and identified 37 cases of improper medication storage across the corporate sector. Board members nodded approvingly at statistics that represented lives saved and lawsuits prevented. But for Daniel, the numbers meant something deeper. They were proof that invisible people could change systems when someone finally listened. Excellent work, Director Reed, said the board chairman. Your department's success has exceeded our most optimistic projections. After the meeting, Daniel walked through the executive floors where he'd once pushed a mop cart. Employees who had never noticed him as a janitor now greeted him by name, seeking his input on safety protocols and risk assessment. The transformation felt surreal. Same building, same hallways, but he moved through them as someone whose observations mattered. His office overlooked Michigan Avenue, with windows that actually opened and a desk large enough to spread out the detailed reports that had once been dismissed as janitor paranoia. On the wall hung his clinical laboratory certifications alongside a framed photo of Chloe at the Science Museum, the field trip that had started this journey toward recognition. At 5:30 p.m., Daniel left the office at a reasonable hour for the first time in years. No more double shifts, no more choosing between rent and medicine, no more watching his daughter pretend she didn't want things they couldn't afford. Their new apartment in Lincoln Park had 2 bedrooms, reliable heat, and a kitchen where Chloe could spread out her increasingly complex science projects. Daniel found her there now, surrounded by textbooks and medical journals, working on a presentation about anaphylaxis prevention for her 7th grade biology class. "How was the board meeting?" she asked, looking up from diagrams of immune system responses. "Good. They approved funding for the school safety program we discussed. The one that teaches teachers about allergic reactions? That's the one. Your idea about having kids with allergies help train their teachers was brilliant." Chloe smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose painful experiences had found purpose in helping others. At 11, she carried herself with the confidence that came from knowing her father's work made the world safer for kids like her. "Dad, turn on Channel 7. Mrs. Patterson said there's a news story about your initiative." Daniel found the remote as the evening news anchor began a segment about corporate safety reforms. On screen, a reporter stood outside Grant Anderson's headquarters, describing how one man's careful observations transformed an entire industry's approach to workplace safety. "The Reed Safety Initiative has now been implemented in over 40 companies nationwide," the anchor continued, preventing countless medical emergencies and saving an estimated $200 million in liability costs. The program began when night janitor Daniel Reed used his clinical background to save CEO Olivia Grant from a deliberately triggered allergic reaction. Chloe pointed at the television with the excitement of a child seeing her father recognized on the evening news. "Dad, that's you. You're famous." "Not famous, sweetheart, just visible." As the story concluded, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia, watching Channel 7. "Still can't believe this all started with a notebook and an EpiPen. Thank you for changing everything." Daniel smiled and typed back, "Thank you for seeing what everyone else missed." Later that evening, as Chloe finished her homework and prepared for bed, she asked the question that had been building for months. "Dad, do you ever miss cleaning the building at night?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "I miss the quiet, and I miss feeling like I was protecting the building while everyone slept, but I don't miss being invisible." "You were never invisible to me." "I know, sweetheart. You and Mom always saw me. She would be proud of what you did, saving that lady, helping all those companies be safer." Daniel tucked Chloe into bed, her room now filled with the kind of scientific equipment and medical textbooks that her curiosity deserved, the anxiety that had defined their lives, the constant calculation of survival, the fear of unexpected bills, the shame of needing help, had been replaced by something Daniel had almost forgotten how to feel: security. "Good night, Chloe Bug." "Good night, Dad. Tomorrow I want to show you my project about how EpiPens work. Mrs. Patterson thinks I should enter it in the state science fair." As Daniel closed her door, he realized that his daughter's future had expanded beyond survival to possibility. She could study medicine if she wanted, could pursue research into allergies and immunology, could become anything her brilliant mind could imagine. The evening news story was still playing in the living room, and Daniel paused to listen as the anchor concluded. "The Reed Safety Initiative proves that expertise can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the people working quietly in the background see what those in power miss." For Channel 7 News, this is Maria Santos. Daniel turned off the television and sat in the comfortable silence of their new apartment. Outside, Chicago hummed with the energy of 8 million people going about their lives, most of them unaware that a former night janitor's observations were making their workplaces safer. His notebook, the same one he'd used to document violations, now sat on the coffee table filled with implementation schedules and success stories from companies across the country. What had started as careful record-keeping by an invisible worker had become a blueprint for saving lives. We hope Daniel's story reminds you that expertise and heroism often come from the most unexpected places. If you've ever felt overlooked or invisible at work, share your story in the comments below. And if this story moved you, let us know where you're listening from. We love hearing from our community around the world. What would you rate this story from 1 to 10?